So welcome everyone that is watching to the LGBTQ plus job search Q&A. As it said with the opening, if you do have any questions today, please feel free to email careerservices@cscc.edu. Since this is a pre-recorded event, we want to make sure that we get your questions answered. So email career services, include 618 job search panel in the subject line. And if you are watching live during the Facebook premiere, please feel free to comment your questions and include your Cougar ID. We have career counselors that are monitoring the chat, and we'll make sure we get your student email that we can follow up with you and your questions and everything. So please feel free to contribute whatever you would like. Real brief, just the goal of this conversation, Career Services with Columbus State just wanted to contribute to Pride Month, which is the month of June, and contribute kind of a career services spin and portion for the conversation. So we are very excited to have everyone here today. We have a wonderful student who will be providing a student view and perspective, as well as some professionals from Equitas Health. Equitas Health is one of our community partners with Columbus State through our student employment department, and they're one of the largest and most well-known LGBTQ plus healthcare organizations in the country. So we have some wonderful insight that we will be diving into as well. So real brief, I'll introduce myself. My name is Taylor Slocum. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a career counselor with Columbus State, and I'll just be moderating the conversation today and asking some different questions. So now I'll turn it over and we'll just do some brief introductions of our panelists today. So first we have Ray Scott. Ray is a Pride Club officer and current social and human services student. Ray, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself a little more in depth, and then potentially providing a little bit of an overview of the Pride Club.
Yes, my name is Ray. My pronouns are he, him. I am identify as transmasculine, non-binary, and bisexual, and I am an officer of our Pride Club at Columbus State, which right now we are mostly looking for other officers to reboot our club in the fall, because right now we are on a break because we're having a bit of trouble finding those officers, which we need. So if anyone watching this is interested in becoming an officer, you can email me or Mandy Mock, yeah, you can email either one of us.
Excellent, thank you. And I think that joining an organization is a great way to get involved in campus. And I think the Pride Club heard so many great things, so definitely consider getting involved. Thank you so much, Ray. We're happy to have you here. Next, I'll introduce Tyrese Bowman. He is a talent acquisition specialist with Equitas Health. Tyrese, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then telling us a little bit more about Equitas.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Tyrese Bowman. I am a talent acquisition specialist at Equitas, as Taylor just said. I work specifically in hiring and recruiting. So I'm reviewing resumes a lot. I'm in the interviews. I do the phone screens. That's my role at the agency. Equitas Health is a regional nonprofit healthcare system. And essentially what that means is we provide a multitude of services within our agency, and we also provide them in a multitude of areas throughout the state of Ohio. So we have our med centers in which we offer primary care, behavioral health care, dentistry, and we also have our own pharmacies attached to our med centers. So it really functions as a comprehensive one-stop shop for our patient population. And then we also have a multitude of initiatives focusing on some of those social determinants of health that people may face, and some of those community-based initiatives providing general prevention and education. And our mission as an organization is to be a gateway to good health for those who are at risk or impacted by HIV, as well as those who are part of the LGBTQ plus community. But within our med centers, we are open to anybody who is just looking for an affirming and inclusive healthcare environment. But when we get into the nitty-gritty of our work and our community-based work, we're focusing on that core population of people.
Excellent. Amazing. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for joining us today. And then last but not least, we have Ramona Peel. She is a lead trainer with the Institute with Equitas Health. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself as well as just a little bit an overview about what the Institute is with Equitas.
All right. Thanks a lot. So hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, my name is Ramona Peel. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm going to follow Ray's lead and also just add that I identify as queer and trans feminine and non-binary. So I'm the lead trainer for the Equitas Health Institute. We're the education, research, and community engagement arm of Equitas Health. My job as the lead trainer is any LGBTQ plus focused educational content. I'm the person who's primarily responsible for creating and delivering that content. So a lot of our work is with external organizations that hire us. And sort of the biggest thing that we do for organizations that hire us is train them on what the evidence-based best practices are for creating more welcoming, affirming, and inclusive environments for the LGBTQ plus people they may employ, for the LGBTQ plus people in the community that they serve, right? So I always like to say that any organization that employs LGBTQ plus folks or serves LGBTQ plus folks could benefit from our services, from the training that I do and that we do. And of course, the punchline is literally every organization employs LGBTQ plus people and serves LGBTQ plus customers, clients, whatever. So if you're interested in learning more about the Institute, we're going to have my email address available later. I can say it now. It's really simple. Ramona Peel at equitashealth.com, or you can just go to equitashealthinstitute.com, poke around there, find out more about the Institute and what we do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as you can see, we have a wealth of knowledge, information, experiences today that we will just dive in and talk through just some general common questions that we tend to see over in career services. And yeah, we'll just kind of dive in, talk through some questions, and then I want to turn it over to Ray at the end to talk through just advocating for self and some leading that discussion. And then we'll wrap up. So that's kind of our agenda for today. So we'll just dive on into the questions here. So the first question is kind of a big one, but it's what general advice do you have for LGBTQ plus students in the job search process for finding companies that support the LGBTQ plus community? So for example, like how could a student research or find a non-discrimination policy? What other insights and advice might you have for finding good quality companies to work for?
I'll start off with sort of a simple one, which is, now this may not necessarily be applicable to smaller organizations that maybe only have, maybe small businesses that don't really have a larger footprint and may not be cataloged by this. But you can always, it's pretty easy to find via Google like the Human Rights Campaign Corporate Equality Index. And I was actually poking around in it this morning just to make sure that like it worked and I could navigate it. But, and I looked up, for example, Equitas Health and a few other companies, but they have a search function where you can look up individual organizations and you can see how Human Rights Campaign has scored them in terms of LGBTQ plus affirming policies, all these sort of different metrics of equality. The other thing too is you can look up specific cities or municipalities and find out what their local regulations or laws are when it comes to LGBTQ plus legal protections. So one thing you can do is, if you're specifically interested in a given organization or company, if they're a large enough organization, you can probably find a lot of that information through the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index. So that's one approach.
Yeah, that's a great piece, Ramona. And kind of lends to what I was thinking as well. We are lucky enough to be living in the digital age, so we can Google a lot of these things, right? We can do initial research into the organizations that we're applying for, and even if it is a smaller organization, they'll likely have, you know, their leadership team on their website. LinkedIn is a good resource to just kind of check people out and search and see if you can infer or pick up on anything. And you can also, you know, see if there are people through LinkedIn that you connect with that work at these organizations, and reaching out to them and really asking for an in-depth understanding of the culture of the environment, and just reaching out and trying to speak with people one-on-one would be a great resource for anybody.
Those are excellent resources. I think those are so helpful. Yeah, LinkedIn especially, and then yeah, the Human Rights Index, that one's great, especially if you want to see everything that's out there, not necessarily just Columbus, Ohio. And I love the idea of connecting with people on LinkedIn and talking to different individuals too. And then Ray, I see you unmuted too.
Yes, I did have a question. So if you're struggling to find information online about a company's policies, or like anything about LGBTQ employees, how would you go about asking that question in an interview?
I'll let Tyrese go first. My bad.
Oh, no worries. I think the basis of this conversation and what I really want to drive home for everybody watching is that, you know, going into an interview, you want to make sure that it's a good fit, not only for the organization, but for yourself. So ideally, the atmosphere would feel open enough for you to ask those questions pretty candidly. You know, people shouldn't be uncomfortable with someone asking, you know, about their equity and processes in regards to their LGBTQ staff. So if you do feel comfortable, I advocate for just asking, essentially. And then there are some things that you can infer from conversations that you have with people during interviews, but I'm not someone who typically likes to assume anything. So I'd say ask if you feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah, I would add to that too. And I don't mean this in any, I want to be very clear about this. I'm not encouraging anybody to engage in subterfuge or anything. But one thing that you can do with a lot of organizations, if you do a little bit of legwork, a little bit of looking, you can likely find out how to contact somebody in HR in an organization. And if you're not necessarily comfortable, you know, sending a message from your personal email that would be really identifiable. Like I said, I'm not trying to say anybody should do anything dishonest, but you could create like a burner Gmail account to ask like sort of a little bit of an anonymized question. Like, I'm thinking of applying for a job there. Can you tell me about the climate for LGBTQ plus employees? Can you tell me about, you know, the LGBTQ plus inclusive policies that you have? And you may or may not get a response to that, but I think that's also worth a shot. And I think the other thing that I'm glad that Tyrese pointed this out, because I think that there is a lot of weirdly implicit pressure to not ask questions, to try to infer things. And maybe I'm going to address a little bit of an elephant in the room, which is that if you look at the LGBTQ plus community, and you specifically look at the younger generational cohorts in the LGBTQ plus community, particularly maybe younger millennials and Generation Z Zoomers, right? Well, guess what? There's a pretty strong overlap between being queer, and particularly in these younger generational cohorts, and not being neurotypical, right? So there's a lot of folks that are not only queer, but also maybe on the spectrum, and maybe they are not going to as readily be able to pick up on the inferences and the hints and the unspoken signals. So what I always advocate for, you know, and some people may or may not be at a level of comfort with doing this, But what I always advocate for is do what you need to do to increase your comfort level and reduce the ambiguity, right? Because I think it's better to ask those direct questions than to try to, well, oh no, they wore this tie, that means something. No, just ask direct questions. What do they say on Sesame Street? I remember from when I was a kid, like asking questions is a great way to learn things. And I'm a really strong advocate of that, rather than trying to make a ton of inferences. I'll give you one really quick story that describes how weird things can get when people rely too much on inferences or what they think they can pick up from body language, which I think is really overrated. So I interviewed for a job. I'll leave the organization anonymized, but I interviewed for a job a few years ago before I got this job at Equitas Health. And I thought the interview went really well. I thought I was on point. I thought I knew my stuff. I thought I was personable. I thought I was likable. But then I get a call from the chair of the committee. And I think the call, they want me to come in and meet. And I think the call is, oh, well, they're going to offer me the job. They're bringing me in. They want to talk about, like, transition into the job, et cetera, et cetera. But no, it was bizarre. The chair of this committee called me in specifically to come in and talk to him because he wanted to explain to me that I didn't get the job because I was too friendly in the interview. I smiled too much, and it sent the signal that I wasn't taking it seriously, which was absolutely not my intent at all, right? And I don't say that to, like, scare anybody into, like, oh, don't smile during an interview. I'm not telling you that. But to me, that illustrates the, like, immense amount of miscommunication that can spring from trying to, like, interpret body language instead of just having direct communication. So there you go.
And being direct will ultimately limit your anxiety in those situations. Interviews are pretty nerve-wracking for anybody. And I would also suggest utilizing reviews on Google, Glassdoor, Indeed. Sometimes employees know that people coming into the agency will want to know these things. And so oftentimes they'll leave reviews about the culture and the things that they've experienced. Even LGBTQ folk will do that.
Absolutely. All of that is so helpful. It's definitely, so my takeaway is do your research. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to ask on LinkedIn individuals. It's okay to do your research, look things up, and even in that interview, ask those questions directly. Like Ramona said, like, sometimes things don't infer things necessarily. Just take your time and ask directly. I think all that's very helpful, very good insight. And thank you. Let's see. So another question that we might see. So this might be for students who maybe are trying to decide on a career path potentially or a major. Any insights? Are there some career areas that tend to be more accepting of LGBTQ plus individuals? Any insight on that at all?
I will say, in my personal experience, not that I know of. I mean, I feel as though LGBTQ folk should take up space in any industry, in any work culture, anything that you want to do. Doesn't matter if you're a part of the community or not, you can do it, essentially. But yes, I don't know that I have some pretty tangible advice on that one specifically. There are obviously industries that are stereotypically more discriminatory based on, gender and assuming sexuality, I guess, as well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if that's something you want to do, then I would encourage you to go full-fledged into that industry. And hopefully, an employer is out there and they'll see the passion, they'll see the work ethic, and they will hire you, or you can start your own business.
Yeah, I want to back that up just in the sense that, we can to some degree talk about how some, fields are more or less accepting. But I would say at the end of the day, you don't want to decide on a career based on that,
Mhm.
you know? And it's funny because a lot of times we end up in spaces or in fields that we didn't necessarily originally intend to go into, right? Like life happens and you end up opportunities arise. Like for example, when I was a student, when I was at the point that a lot of the audiences, I thought I was going to go into broadcasting, right? That was what I wanted to do. So I remember I ended up majoring in political science, but I worked at my college radio station. So I thought, okay, that's going to be the experience I need to go into broadcasting. Well, it turned out I ended up going into political science. And then it turned out much further down the line, I ended up getting this opportunity to, become a cultural competency trainer. And it's funny too, because I hesitate to try to present my experience as something that can be easily replicated because there's both benefits and drawbacks to I guess the way I talk about it is being professionally trans, in the sense that my identity as a queer and trans person is like central to my career. So in some ways that's really awesome, and in other ways there's like sort of a mental health cost to that. But I would say definitely you should be driven by what you want to do, rather than, well, I'm going to avoid that industry because I heard that it's more transphobic or it's more homophobic.
I
Absolutely.
just wanted to add on to that. I think it's better to look less at the like very broad scope of like maybe this field is more discriminatory. That could be true, but you want to look at like individual agencies instead,
Yes.
because there's
Yes.
always going to be an option
Right.
that is going to be affirming. And I think that you really need to, if you have a dream, that it's not worth giving up that dream because you are scared that, oh, they may not be accepting. There will always be someone who is accepting.
Yeah.
I love
I think
that.
that's a great point.
And I feel like all of that is so reassuring. And, students out there, whatever your dream is and what you want to pursue, like everybody's saying, definitely go for it and do your research. Like that first question, do your research to find who's going to accept you for you and let you do that passion. And I like Ramona mentioning too, that maybe sometimes we see this in career services where it's somebody may pick a major and then there's this anxiety of like, I'm going to pick the wrong major, I'm going to pick the wrong thing, but doors open and the path changes as you go. So I think that's also a really helpful point. You're not stuck in that forever necessarily.
Right. I want to add one thing before we move on to that point, Taylor, is so to the students that are watching this right now, they're like, oh, I have to pick a major right now. And if I pick wrong, my entire life let me go through real quick. I started out majoring in journalism. Then I didn't like that. So I switched my major to communication. Then I didn't like that. So I switched my major to history. Then I finally landed on political science. So you might have to go through a process of finding, what fits what you want to do the most, what you're most passionate about, and that's okay.
Absolutely. And I think it's definitely being open to different experiences and trying new things like a broadcast internship or, just be open to different things like that. Joining the Pride Club, different things like that can open doors and really help you find what fits with who you are in your major and career path too. So thank you. I appreciate that. And that's kind of a good segue. One of the questions that we tend to see is, should employment in or activity with LGBTQ plus organizations be added on a resume or included on a resume?
Yes, I want to jump in on this simply because I've been thinking about this, for the last few days. And where my mind sort of landed is you're going to have to fight this battle at some point. So really this and the questions that are coming up that I know that are sort of in the same category, the questions around, well, how much should I share about my LGBTQ plus identity? How much should I share about my sexual orientation, my gender identity, my background, my activism? How much should I share and when in the job search process? Is, to me, I think the really basic question is, and this is where you as the applicant have some control, is you get to control when you fight these battles. I would love to tell you that, oh, don't worry about it. You're never going to have a fight that's centered around your identity as an LGBTQ plus person. I would love it if that was the case. But what is likely for a lot of us is that no matter where we get hired, no matter where we work, at some point, we're going to end up engaged in some sort of conflict with somebody or some part of an organization based around being LGBTQ plus. So I think a really key question to think about is, if you're going to fight that battle, think about your choice and when that battle is fought. Meaning that you can lay all your cards on the table at the start, and maybe that means you don't get the job. And maybe that's why you don't want to do it. But conversely, if you leave all that stuff out, you're going to have to fight that battle later on. Right? So I think it's really a matter of thinking about when you want to fight that battle. And I would say personally, from my own experience as a trans person who came out in the middle of her career, who came out as a trans person in her late 30s, is, I would much rather have them know from the start, know what they're getting, than try to say a year, 2 years, 5 years after being in a place, then come out. Now, we all have to decide to do that in our own pace, in our own time, manner, and place, right? And that's a very obviously individual decision. But what I would say to anybody is, I would add a little bit to it. Like, if you're already out as LGBTQ plus, you might as well just blurp it all out at the start. I mean, you might as well do it at the start. Now, I think there is a little bit of a complication in the sense that, what if you're applying for jobs and you're not out? Then that's a very tricky personal decision. You have to then decide, do I want to be out to this employer? And that I'll admit, that's trickier if you're somebody who isn't entirely out yet. But I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I think that you bring up a really good point about how it can be tricky depending on someone's personal circumstances. But for me, as someone who reviews resumes day in, day out, I look at them a little bit more critically, and I try to deduce the information that I see on the resume and not just read it as extremely straightforward. So I think if your involvement in the LGBTQ organizations is somehow, there are somehow transferable skills that you could relate to the job that you're applying for, I'd certainly recommend putting it on there. If it's relevant to who you are as a person, I recommend putting it on there. And particularly if I'm reviewing a resume for someone and someone doesn't have a lot of direct experience for the specific role, but I see that they have involvement in the LGBTQ plus community, and there's a passion there that I can see from someone's resume, being the organization that Equitas Health is, and knowing that our work is community-based, and knowing that we want to hire people who aren't going to cause harm to the individuals that we serve. There's a cultural competency piece that I'm looking for in resumes, and when I see involvement in LGBTQ organizations, for me recruiting at Equitas Health specifically, I say that that's an asset.
Absolutely. I really like all those points. I like the point of relevance too. And I like that, Therese, you said relevance to the organization and to yourself, which I think hits on Ramona's pieces too. If it is something that, your identity is something very relevant that you want out there and want them to know, again, goes with those comfort levels and things like that. But yeah, I think that's very helpful advice and information too. I appreciate that. Let's see. So this kind of goes with kind of a continuation of that conversation, but how should a job seeker potentially disclose his, her, their pronouns in different settings?
I mean, I'll just put it out there as just being straightforward. I would say have your pronouns on your resume. You know, I would just say present it as just very like banal, matter of fact, normal. Here's my pronouns.
Yeah, on your resume, in your email signature, just put it up there, as Ramona said, matter of factly. It is what it is.
Absolutely, that's so helpful. So it can be right on your application documents. It doesn't have to be this nerve-wracking thing. It can just be straight up, like you said, email signatures, part of who you are, included on the resume. I know in career services, we are definitely seeing more pronouns included kind of in that header and things like that, which I think is great.
And I would add one other little thing to that, just as a general principle, is that when you're talking about these aspects of yourself, particularly going back to Tyrese's point about, you know, if it's really central, if it's important to you, particularly if it's relevant to the job. I think one thing that some of us tend to do is we tend to over-explain. We tend to feel like that we have to argue for and justify our identities or justify our sexuality. And I understand that impulse, but I think generally it's a mistake. I think it's a better approach just to not put it out there as something you feel like you're going to have to be defending in a cross-examination. Just put it out there and just, there it is, full stop. These are the facts about me. And that's it. They're not up for debate.
Yeah, I love that, Ramona, because, you know, we want to be cognizant of the fact that there is potential out there that organizations will not be receptive of that, and that, you know, in a way you could be discriminated against based on really any factor. But at the end of the day, that's not an organization that you want to work for. So you don't want to be getting a paycheck from an organization like that. So being matter of fact, being upfront, and feeling comfortable in that is extremely important.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, very helpful. I think that's perfect. And then, so I think we've kind of touched on this, but if there's anything else that we can add, so this question is just, should an individual out themselves on an application, resume, or cover letter? What about in an interview? So I think we kind of covered that. It sounds like the consensus is it's okay to put it on your resume, your introduction documents. It's okay to, I really like the advice of just, it's factual. You're just kind of putting it out there. I like the advice too of if it's put out there and you're just including it as who you are, and then there is some, you know, some discrimination or something that comes through, that's not necessarily the right organization for you. So I think all of that's so helpful. Is there anything else anyone would want to add to that at all? I think we covered that question pretty well.
No, I don't think so.
Perfect. Awesome. So this is another question about dress or interview attire. How should a job seeker dress for an interview? Any advice on that at all?
Yeah, so I mean, I think dressing in a way, I guess I'll say blanket statement, let's try business casual for an interview. But I think what you wear impacts your energy and how you feel and how you walk about in the world and how confident you are that day. I know that can impact how I feel sometimes what I'm wearing. So I think wearing something to an interview that you feel confident in, you feel able to present your best self in, is the best way to go. I have two anecdotes that I want to talk about. So I go to quite a few career fairs, and I'm typically in jeans and a t-shirt because I'm not going to be at a college career fair in a three-piece suit. That's just not my preference. But, I did have someone come up to me who thought that I was, a student applying for jobs and not an employer. And he was kind of hassling me, asking, where's my suit? No one's going to take me seriously here. And I told him that I'm here working as an employer, looking for individuals to do jobs, and I'm not necessarily looking at their attire. They could be coming from an exam. They could have had a horrible day. You don't know, but they're here to present me their resume, present me their skills, and that's really what I'm looking for. So again, there's so many mindsets out there in the world of employers and recruiters. And you kind of just have to do what feels most comfortable to you. But also, I've had someone who is a trans woman and has never got to dress as herself in an interview before. And so she called me the day before the interview and said, I want to be very honest, I don't have a lot of female presenting clothes, but I want to dress as myself as a woman in this interview. Do you think, if I don't have the nicest clothes out there, that will be a contributing factor to if I get the job or not? And I said, absolutely not. I want you to feel comfortable. I want you to dress as yourself. I want you to dress in whatever makes you feel most comfortable. And that's not going to be a contributing factor of whether or not you do get the job. It's going to be if it's a good fit for you, if it's a good fit for us, and if we think that, you can get the job done and do it well. Those are the things that we're looking at. So I think there are just so many perspectives and ways to go about it. But ultimately, I would say dress to your comfort level, but generally something classic business casual. You can't really go wrong.
Yeah, I want to echo what Tyrese said, is that what I think is more important than anything is wear an outfit, present yourself in the way that you are going to be most confident in the interview.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's absolutely the way to go. It's funny that Tyrese mentioned a trans woman who asked about attire for an interview. I remember when I applied for this job, and thankfully it didn't impact me getting the job. But I remember when I got this job, I really stressed about like what to wear to the interview. And I overshot it in the sense that I went out and bought essentially like a Hillary Clinton pantsuit for the interview. And then it ended up that the interview, this was in July. It was in a small windowless room. It was with an overhead projector that made the room even hotter. So I'm sweating while I'm giving my presentation. And, looking back, I wish I had maybe worn something that I was a little bit more comfortable in, that more was authentic to who I am, which generally speaking isn't that level of formality. I think the other thing I would add to that too is obviously with the first principle, I completely agree, business casual. And I would say that I will admit this to you, Tyrese, is people use the term business casual. I will admit that I don't entirely understand what the boundaries are of business casual, right? So that might be something that people may want to research a little bit so they have a better idea of if they have clothes already that would fit that category of business casual. The other thing I would add is, and this is very dependent on where you are in your personal journey, how out you are or not out you are, and I don't want to put too much pressure on this, but first impressions are really impactful. And if you think that on this job, if you get it, you want to present a certain way consistently, it's probably best for you if you can present consistent with that in your interview. Now, if you don't, it's not the end of the world. You can always change course later. But if you're able to do that and you feel comfortable enough doing it, the interview is also an opportunity not just for you to show how good you're going to be at the job, project your confidence, but it can also, if the opportunity is right, be an opportunity for you to send a signal about how you intend to present yourself on that job.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I do have
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
I
Go
do
ahead.
have a question because I see what the points that you're making about being comfortable and how, I personally don't think that how you dress should entirely impact if you get a job or not. But I'm also curious if you know of any resources because unfortunately a lot of LGBTQ community members are low income. If you like know of any resources that could maybe help them get the proper attire for an interview.
One thing that I know of, and I know this because I actually did training for them, is I know we have a local. It's down in it's in the short north. Dress for Success, because one of the reasons why we did training for them was they wanted to be more inclusive and not just be a resource for cis women who need attire for interviews. So as far as I know, it's been a couple of years since we trained them, but as far as I know, at least their intent is that they also want to be inclusive and serve the LGBTQ plus community, trans feminine folks, trans mask folks, non-binary folks. So Dress for Success would be one resource that I know of, but I'm sure that there are others.
Yeah, there's Dress for Success. I know of My Brother's Closet, which is here in Columbus as well. They provide clothing for interviews specifically for men. Also, I'm an avid thrift store shopper. I love Goodwill. I love Ohio Thrift. They have some great finds in there. Ultimately, I'm more of a basic. I like to have my basic solid colors, things that I can throw and put together an outfit, and I don't have to put too much effort or thought into it, is my go-to. But there are some resources in Columbus, and I'd recommend looking into them a little bit more. So there's Dress for Success and My Brother's Closet that I know of.
Yes, and career services, we actually do have a referral to Dress for Success, and we're working to develop one with My Brother's Closet as well. So come to career services and we can get you a nice referral in that starting step to doing that too. And I also love the thrifting idea too, where you can you still find some really cool professional finds too, but those are excellent resources that are out there. And I really like the suggestion too of if you have a question, ask for clarification. I love that. Like, come to career services if you're like, does this look okay? We can do it virtually, or eventually we'll be in person. But if you want to show us what your definition of comfort and professional and business casual is, show us and we can give you some insight. And then also, I love the story of the individual calling and asking. Again, I think that goes back to the initial question. It's okay to research and it's okay to be direct and ask your questions. Because I think that just gave a lot of context for that too. So just wanted to reiterate that as well. So I'll ask a few more questions. So I think this kind of goes hand in hand. So this is more like logistical, but like for trans job seekers, when is it okay to use a chosen name, and when does a legal name have to be used in the job search or resume or interview, things like that?
Yeah, so I've seen it be done in a few different ways. So I have seen preferred names on resumes, which I'm totally fine with. Just knowing further down in the process, if we were to extend an offer and we had to do our formal background checks and collect the drug screen, in which there would need to be a legal name, that would be the case, but we will always refer to you as your preferred name. I've seen on resumes people put their legal name, but as soon as we begin the phone screen, they'll disclose their preferred name, and then from that point forward, we'll refer to them as their preferred name. And I've seen a different name on a resume, but a different name on the email. So it really just depends what you feel most comfortable with, again. But I think disclosing your preferred name throughout the process would be more beneficial for you, because you will ultimately feel more comfortable if someone is referring to you by the name that you identify with the most. And that comfort will aid into the reduced anxiety of an interview and of the hiring process. So that's my opinion on it.
I think that's very, very helpful. Again, goes with being direct early on and with that comfort experience. So I think that is perfect. Let's see. We'll kind of shift into two more questions and we'll turn it over to Ray. So two more questions. So one is, what are good questions that an interviewee should ask the employer in an interview to see if it's the right, like kind of the right fit for them?
I mean, one thing that I think is really important, I think that this applies most specifically to trans and non-binary folks, but I also think it's a good question to maybe get at the larger environment, the larger culture of an organization, is directly ask about what's covered under the employee health care, what's covered under the health insurance that the employer is going to provide. And I would say most specifically, ask about gender affirming care, ask about trans health care and what is covered and what isn't. Because obviously that's most relevant to trans and non-binary folks. But if the answer is, oh, we don't cover stuff like that, I think you can learn a lot about what their culture of inclusion is just based on that. Is if like they don't prioritize providing that to their trans and non-binary employees, I think that says a lot in a broader sense about their culture of inclusion for the whole LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And then I guess more broadly, also just asking about their non-discrimination policies as well, asking directly about their culture and seeing what their response is to that question, and seeing what points that they have decided are important to hone in on in the interview to get the point across and make it very clear the environment that they're fostering are great questions to ask as well.
Absolutely. I think those are all great questions, good things to kind of feel out the culture. And I know we were talking about this when we did like our pre-meeting, but talking like an interview, yes, it's the opportunity for the interviewer to figure out if you're the right fit for the company, but it's also an opportunity for the interviewee to see if they want to work for that company. So that's, it's a give and take. So it's, so be open-minded about asking questions and seeing if it's the right fit for everybody. So last question here, and then we'll turn it over to Ray, but just are there any additional resources that you recommend for students or individuals to further research this topic? Is there anything else out there that you want to make sure that individuals are aware of?
I'm trying to think what comes to mind. I mean, Ramona already mentioned the Human Rights Campaign. They have so many resources available for people to review and read and learn a little bit more about equity in the process. Equity both that you should expect from the employer, and then as well the process as a candidate and someone who's interviewing. Those are great avenues. But also, I think that there are, right now, it seems to be there's a catalyst on social media of people being comfortable sharing their experiences with organizations, and there's beautiful infographics and different resources and links for people. So I think if you ever come across anything like that as you're scrolling, to just take a second to click and do some research, even if it isn't pertinent to your circumstance right now, just knowing for the future would be great.
Absolutely. And I think the power of social media and being able to follow companies and get on LinkedIn and follow different companies. I think that, yeah, wealth of information and resources out there just from what they're sharing and posting. But yeah, this was so helpful. I know I learned a lot and this was amazing. I do want to turn it over to Ray to just have some opportunity. I know Ray had some questions prepared about the topic of advocating for self. So Ray, I want to give you some some time to ask your questions and get some feedback from these awesome panelists.
Yes. Okay. So my biggest question I have is, in the event that you experience discrimination in the workplace, how do you advocate for yourself? Or what other options are there to address that?
Well, one thing I would say is be aware of the resources that are available to you, both within the organization and in whatever locality that you're in, right? Depending on, for example, in Ohio, unfortunately, we don't have any statewide anti-discrimination protections, but I think now we're up to 28 different cities and municipalities that have local anti-discrimination laws. So you would definitely want to understand where you would stand in terms of legal protection, where you work, before taking sort of action, any sort of action. The other thing that I think is very tricky, I'm gonna leave most of this discussion to Tyrese, is I know that we all, and I know in my organization, like chapter and verse, we are told file an incident report, right? Document it, document it, document it. But I think there's also a really understandable fear from a lot of LGBTQ plus folks that them taking action or them pushing back against discrimination may lead to more negative outcomes, may lead to retaliation. So I can't really give you a super great, simple answer. But definitely you want to know where you stand in terms of your protections in whatever city or area that you're in. You would want to know what the company's actual policies are. And I would say definitely document things for your own purposes, whether or not you're ever going to take that to that company's HR. Right, I would say still document everything that happens for yourself. But I don't want to wade into HR waters too much, so I'm gonna shut up and let Tyrese address some of that.
I think you brought up really great points and very similar to the ones that I would have. The documentation piece, if you're able to do that, compiling any information, any conversations, whether it be via email or if there's an internal kind of communicating software that the organization uses, keeping that information, because the issue that people can run into is that sometimes discrimination isn't overt. It can be very nuanced. And so it's difficult to present your case sometimes. And so making sure that you are documenting those instances, whether you want to file an incident report or not, or you want to just keep it for yourself for an instance in which you have information to present cohesively to your HR, to the HR department, would be a great option. And then, as Ramona said, looking into how they have historically handled situations like this or what policies they have in place will help you understand the steps that you need to take to protect yourself in the future or protect yourself in the moment. I don't know, did we answer your question, Ray?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
And then I was also wondering, hold on, I need to remember what I just thought of. How do you deal with the mental toll that advocating for yourself can have? Because I feel like in my experience, in some environments, I've really had to push to get my pronouns respected, and that can definitely cause a mental toll. So I was just wondering if you have any tips to deal with that.
Oh God, I mean, I say this as a half joke, but it's one of those half jokes that is true, which is my therapist earns her money. So one thing I would say, I guess this goes back to the health insurance part too. Make sure that if you can, make sure that the employee healthcare, system at your employer covers like mental health services in a robust way, because I definitely know that I need therapy. I need therapy for other reasons too, but You know, I love my job, but just in my own specific context for a second, I mentioned earlier that, you know, I go out and I do training on specifically things that are related to my lived experience and my identity. And it's very rewarding work, and I love it. And I wouldn't want to not do it. But there is a cost. There is a cost to your mental health. I know that, Ray, you're specifically talking about advocating for yourself and asserting your pronouns and things like that in any context. But I think that's also applicable to my experience, just in the sense that, you know, in my work, people will say things to you that are sometimes just ignorant, and other times they're kind of actively transphobic. And I still have to find a way to keep like a placid, friendly face and be like, let's make this a teachable moment. You know, so I think that it's important for us to acknowledge that reality, is that I would say that it's very important to advocate for yourself, because once again, it's I don't mean to like use sort of the same framework intentionally, but I think it's sort of similar in the sense that, so let's say that you, it's tiring to assert your pronouns, right? And maybe you're tempted to like stop asserting that. Maybe you're tempted to like give up on that battle. But really, you're not giving up on the battle. You're just delaying the battle to a later point. Because if getting misgendered is something that bothers you, you're not going to be able to just swallow that indefinitely with no other effects, right? So it's really a matter of, you know, do you want to deal with the mental health impact of advocating for yourself now, or the mental impact later of not advocating for yourself? Now, I'm the type of person, I have a big bias towards action, right, rather than passivity. I would rather take action, because at least I feel like I am asserting some control. I'm asserting some amount of agency over what is happening to me and what the environment is around me. Other people may not have that bias towards action and autonomy, right? To me, it's like asserting my autonomy as a human, that you're going to respect my pronouns. You're going to get it right. Not everybody is going to be like me on that, but I would say if that specific thing is something what we're talking about, you're not going to be able to just put the problem away and never deal with it again. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I think it's very true. It can be extremely tiring to having to consistently advocate for yourself and correct individuals, but looking for those moments to be a teacher, in a sense, those teachable moments that Ramona mentioned are important, not only to yourself, but maybe it'll get into the head of the person that you are trying to correct. You know, if it happens the first time, the second time, or the third time, hopefully it will, you know, begin to stick. But also in the same vein, if it is consistent and you don't see a change, pretty candidly, I would say that it's probably time to start looking for an exit plan. And in that sense, as you're doing that, and maybe the exit plan, maybe the exit does come, or maybe, you know, it's just beginning a stage, I would advocate for taking care of yourself. Self-care is extremely important, no matter what the role, what the circumstance. Taking care of yourself outside of work is extremely crucial. You know, Ramona mentioned therapy. I do yoga and guided meditations because I have to. It's self-care. So looking for those things that help ground you and help energize you and bring you back are extremely crucial, whether, you know, at work it's just a stressful day and something work-related happen, or something really detrimental to your mental health happen. It's important to have those avenues for care.
I would add one more thing to that, and everybody needs to do the best thing for themselves. So I want to be clear about that. Like, you don't have necessarily a larger responsibility, but I do want to point this out. So let's say that you are a trans employee at an organization, and let's say that it is hard, and eventually you just sort of like, oh, it's fine, it doesn't really bother me, and it does bother you. I think it's worth also thinking what the larger impact of that could be. What I mean by that is this, is that if you don't assert your pronouns and defend that, what happens to the next trans employee? Maybe that employee keeps misgendering you. When that other person tries to assert their pronouns, maybe that person is going to be like, well, so-and-so is fine with getting misgendered. It's not a big deal to them. Why is it a big deal to you? So once again, I hesitate because you're not getting paid to be an advocate for the trans community if that has nothing to do with your job duties. I know that. But I think it is worth thinking about, like, what the larger impact may be of you not, asserting your authentic self in those contexts.
Yeah. And I think for me, something more so in my worldview and perspective is centered around race, but I think is transferable, is that when people are inappropriately identifying you or making inappropriate comments about who you are and as a person, it says more about the other person. What I mean, like, it does impact you and does impact me when those instances happen. But redirecting and making sure that in my mind, I'm telling myself this has nothing to do with who I am as an individual. This isn't a negative impact that I'm placing out in the world. This isn't a negative energy that I'm putting out in the world. It's a negative energy that is coming my way. And I know undoubtedly that I'm not deserving of that. And so when it does happen, and if you redirect the framing and redirect how you're thinking about it, it does make it easier. And in my personal experience and the experiences and the conversations that I've had, more so around race again.
I did have one more question. It's more so about like highlighting the services that Equitas Health provides, because I do want to make some of the viewers aware that there are services out there. So things that I know that Equitas Health provides are there's a trans support group, and there's a legal name change clinic. So I was just wondering if there's any other services you guys would like to highlight.
I mean, one that I want to highlight that isn't directly related to employment, but I think is very relevant to trans and non-binary people, maybe if they don't know about this yet, is that if you're a trans or non-binary person and you want access to hormone replacement therapy, right? At our clinics, at our locations, that is done on an informed consent basis. Meaning that some people may not know this, because I think a lot of people have the idea in their heads that if you want to start transitioning medically, that you have to get letters from mental health professionals to start HRT. And yeah, you do generally need to still do that for gender affirming surgeries. I know that because I just went through that. But at Equitas Health, at our clinics in Columbus, in Dayton, in Cincinnati, we do it via informed consent, meaning that if you're over the age of 18 and you can provide informed consent, and there isn't any really horrible medical red flag that comes up on the blood work that is done, you're going to be able to start HRT, and you don't need to get, the letters confirming that from additional healthcare professionals. So that's not related to employment, but I think that it's an important thing that trans folks should know about, because I don't know how widely that's understood publicly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we have a plethora of initiatives and resources here at Equitas. Like a few I guess I could highlight our Mosaic, which is our space for trans and non-binary people of color. Utilize that space and have conversations with our staff, and you get testing as well, get information about PrEP as well. We have Bravo, which is geared towards victims of domestic violence. There's resources there. Safe Point, syringe access. I mean, if our organization sounds like something that's interesting to you, I definitely would recommend going onto our website and just looking at all of the resources that we do provide to people.
Absolutely. This has all been so incredibly helpful. And I do just want to quickly plug at Columbus State, there are free resources too for anyone that is looking for mental health counseling. Like we have student advocacy as well that can help navigate certain things. So many different resources and everything through the college that we can get you connected with as well too. And just I hope what shine through is how amazing Equitas Health is, how amazing that organization is, and the people that work for that organization. Gained such a wealth of information today. Thank you, Ray, for providing a student perspective, asking some really wonderful questions. Tyrese, Ramona, thank you for your perspectives, for your insight, and for everything that you provided today. This has been such a helpful and wonderful conversation. And yeah, any closing thoughts or anything?
Well, thank you, Taylor, for coordinating and facilitating this. This is great. And I think it'll be a great resource to your students.
I have sort of a left field thing to say, which is, you know, what I've noticed in our community is that a lot of us are extremely online, right? A lot of us are extremely online. And one thing that I've noticed with us being extremely online is what gets amplified. What gets amplified is the hatred that's aimed at us. What gets amplified are the perspectives of people that want to harm us. And I don't want anybody to feel like I'm questioning like their view of reality, but I do want to say this, which is that I think it's important to remember that out there off of the internet, there's a lot of spaces and a lot of people that aren't going to be hostile. I mean, one of the things that jumps out at me is that for all of the attention, and it is scary and it is dangerous and it's horrible that in so many states, including Ohio, there's these efforts to make life so much harder for trans and non-binary people, for trans and non-binary children. And that's horrible, and we need to fight it, and we are fighting it. But I think it's also important to remember that the vast majority of the public does not support those efforts. The vast majority of the public does not want trans people to be trans girls to be barred from high school sports. The vast majority of the public does not want transition-related care for children and adolescents to be banned, and so on and so forth. So one thing that I think is really important for us to remember is that maybe things aren't as horrible as they seem to us, particularly if we're really, really marinating in that negativity online all the time. Maybe there's more reason to be optimistic about what's going to happen to us and what's going to happen to our community than you know, what we get exposed to online, because those can really become echo chambers. And if it's those negative messages, those negative perspectives that are what is the echo chamber that you're caught in, I encourage you to, if you can, step out of it a little bit and just understand that also people will surprise you. I can say in my own personal experience, in my experience of coming out in multiple ways at multiple times of different populations, people will surprise you. There have been people that I expected would be really hostile, be really supportive. And honestly, to be, transparent, there have even been some people that I expected to be really supportive that have just kind of drifted out of my life. But I know it's kind of a left field thing, but one thing that I feel from my community, and I feel particularly for younger trans and non-binary folks, is this sort of like overwhelming dread and hopelessness. And I think we need to start affirmatively fighting that, because the future is not set and we are not doomed to a horrible fate individually or collectively. We can still, change that future, and we can still find people and organizations that are going to support us in this fight. So basically, TLDR is, maybe it's not as hopeless as it looks like it is on Twitter. I don't know, but I wanted to sort of leave with a little message of hope from my end.
That's great. Absolutely. Just take up space. Ray, Ramona, Taylor, myself, we all deserve to take up space. And any student that's watching, you deserve to take up space and be there, and your perspective is valid.
Absolutely. And I think the Pride group at Columbus State, I think get in contact with Ray, because I think that is an amazing way to find that hope and people that are wonderful and supportive, and an easy way to find that, I would say. But Ray, do you have anything else that you want to add or include?
I just wanted to echo that. I came from a household that did not support me at all, and now I'm living on my own, and I've been able to find community at Columbus State, and I just want all the students watching this to know that there are people out there, there is support out there, and there is hope out there. So please do not give up on yourself.
Thank you all. I think that is a wonderful stopping point and closing to this conversation. Again, if you have questions, feel free to relay them to Career Services. We'll get them out there. We'll get your questions answered. And know that you have career counselors here in Career Services that are supportive and want to help you grow as well. So again, thank you all for this conversation. It was so wonderful. And yeah, anybody that's watching, I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Bye.